Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. Join me as we have a real-life discussion on how to change your life by changing your thoughts. Remember, question everything, trust yourself, and find your truth. Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. My name is Sloan Fremont, and I'm your host. Today, we're going to be talking about Living Tantra. And as you'll hear on this interview, this is not something that I knew anything about. I actually had misconceptions about what Tantra is and even Living Tantra. And today you're going to learn more about that and how you can apply it in your own life. And if you are unfamiliar with it like me, I think you might be surprised at how this is something that you can incorporate as a lifestyle, as a way of life. And our interview today is very practical. It's very real. And these are things that you can do in your own life. And what I really loved about my interview with Jan today is we talked through some exercises that I found really helpful from her book. And I think you're going to love them too. And I think you're going to love just this concept and what it can mean for you in your life. So stay tuned to that. There's a great interview coming up with Jan Day, author of the book, Living Tantra, A Journey into Sex, Spirit, and Relationship. Before we get to that, though, I want to remind you, if you are not signed up for my newsletter, please visit my website, sloanfremont.com. Over on the right-hand side, you're going to see a box, and that's where you can enter your email address, and you'll get updated every time there's a new podcast episode, which is generally every Tuesday. And I'm also going to be sending out emails coming up about a new course I'm launching that I know you're absolutely going to love. So if you have to, pause the video, go to sloanfremont.com. Enter your email address on the right-hand side and you'll be in. And the other thing I want to remind you of, if we're not connected on social media, if you're watching this on one of the video sites, please be sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video. That helps more people find us. It helps the message gets out to more people. If you're listening to this on the podcasting platforms, please be sure to share this interview with somebody, share the podcast, let them know what's out there. Let them know there's something else. There's something positive they can listen to and start to really change their perspective and change their life. So those are my asks of you today. Please do that. And like I said, pause the video or the audio if you need to do that. And with that, we'll get on to the interview with Jan Day. The principles of Living Tantra are to use all experiences to learn and become more conscious of ourselves and the world around us, and to develop greater compassion for ourselves, each other, and the world. This book introduces practices and principles to support living this in your everyday life, as well as stories from Jan's own journey and participant experiences from her workshops. So Jan, I want to welcome you to the Create What You Speak podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Sloan. Lovely to meet you and lovely to be here.
Yeah. So let's start out by having you tell you just a little bit about yourself and tell us about your book, Living Tantra.
Yeah. So the book really emerged out of the workshops that I teach and out of my whole life experience. Mm-hmm. So I have about 40 years of journeying with healing my sexuality. Probably my journey took about 20 years of just really like doing lots of workshops, learning, discovering, doing a lot of healing work, a lot of therapy, until I came to a place where I felt kind of whole. And actually there's an interesting story, I think it's even in the book, where like my sexuality was completely messed up, and
I read about it.
It was just it was a bit of a disaster. And there came a point where I was actually in Switzerland with a spiritual teacher there, and I loved her. I really felt deeply connected to her, and I thought about, shall I go and live in India with her? Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, it was a real like movement of the heart. And then I found out that she separates the men and the women, that sex is not included in that community. Right. And I realized immediately, no, in this lifetime, my journey is about healing sexuality. It's not about leaving that out. And so that's not for me. And then she was like a god for me, almost an avatar. And so I thought at that point, even if God tells me sex is wrong, I won't believe it. So then I knew the journey of healing sexuality was kind of pretty much I'd done it. That piece was done. Nobody was going to tell me sex was wrong ever again.
Well, right. And how liberating that is, right? Because suppressed in that way, your whole life, up until then, that is I imagine, a very difficult place to be, really, and difficult to experience.
I mean, in the beginning, it wasn't difficult. It was simple in the beginning because
Yeah,
I went into purity. So, that was actually a very easy way to live. It was when the urge, the natural life of my sexuality began to come alive. That's when things got difficult because
yeah,
there was like a crash of the past and the present. And that was very uncomfortable. And that was when I had no choice but
yeah,
to go on a healing journey,
yeah,
which was basically inevitably what led, like 40 years later to the book, because I'd been teaching and I just really wanted to find a way. My workshops are quite long residential workshops. We dived quite deep into this work. But of course, not everybody can come to a 7-day workshop in England. So really wanted the book to be a way for people to access this learning, this teaching, without having to come to a workshop, to find it in their everyday life, without having to do a big workshop. But also for the people who do my workshops, it's a very enriched environment. It's very intense. We're working very closely with each other. And then they have to find a way of integrating that into their everyday life. And the book is really like it takes you by the hand and takes you, okay, these are the principles, and now we're going to live it in everyday life in, like, what do I do when I'm going shopping level?
right. Yes.
So it's not esoteric, and it's not only when I'm in a workshop. It has to be in everyday life.
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
because I want to talk about that. I want to talk about all the exercises that you included in the book. I want to actually talk to you about some of my favorites that I've been using since I read your book.
Oh, great. Yeah.
But before we even get into that, can you define for us what Tantra is, what Living Tantra is? Is there a difference? And also maybe address some misconceptions that people have about what it actually means.
Sure. Yeah. So Tantra is a very ancient system that began in India, and it actually began as a way of taking spirituality out of being a monk in a cave in the mountains. Right. So it's a very ancient spiritual path that originated in India. Mm-hmm. Now, Living Tantra is taking the principles of Tantra, which is really to include everything, not to leave anything out, to use all of life, including sexuality, to use everything to learn and to grow and to become more in touch with life and God and compassion and heart. So Living Tantra brings us, what I am not trying to do is recreate what there was in India 2,000 years ago. Right. I've taken the root principles and created a system that is needed in our Western culture now in 2022 now. So it's current and of our time. So it's not in any way supposed to match whatever was going on 2,000 years ago in India. Right. So that's what Living Tantra is. Now, it's a contemporary neo-tantra, you would say, in that case. But there's lots of other people who've said, okay, this is Tantra, and adapted it. And many of those people, unfortunately, have made Tantra only about sex, which is, It never was and never is supposed to be. So there is a misconception that Tantra is all about sex. And while we certainly do concentrate quite a lot on sex because it's such a powerful energy that if you ignore it, and certainly in the West, we've made it pretty dysfunctional. So it's important that it gets included and explored, and that the wounds from that get healed. But that doesn't mean that it's all about sex. It's also about how do we do our job? How do we relate to our parents and our children? How do we relate to our colleagues? How do we relate to how we use the resources in the world? It's like, how do we learn from everything in our experience to bring ourselves into more tune and more wholeness? Right. So that's what Tantra really is. And yeah, there are lots of misconceptions and a lot of technique oriented stuff that's just techniques of sex, which for me has got really nothing to do with Tantra at all. So
yeah. But honestly, I didn't really know what Tantra was before reading your book. I think I had more of the sexual definition because I had seen books and what you had talked about. But it wasn't something that I was familiar with. So it's very interesting to me to understand and learn what it actually was, because I didn't know. And what I really enjoyed about your book was the the practicality of it, but also how you led people. I felt as the reader, I was being led through in a very slow and safe way. And I know
Yeah.
that those are two things that were big themes that I noticed throughout your book that you touched a lot of the importance of that, of, you know, how, and I really started to look at that in my own life, how with anything, how I tend to move quickly. I go fast. I want to get it done. I want, you know, and so that reminder of slowing down and building upon rather than expecting to go to the next was, I really enjoyed that about your book.
Yeah, great. That's lovely to hear. And that is fundamental actually to all my work, that really if we go slowly, we can be there in the experience that we're in. And when we're there, we have all our senses and available to us, which actually makes it safe. It means that we can know when things are going beyond what's okay for us. And if we go too fast, we skip over that and we end up in trouble.
Right. And that leads to one of the things there was a point in the book where you mentioned my favorite phrase actually, which is about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. That phrase, I heard that years ago when I first started out as a consultant. I heard that from one of the managers, and I've carried that through my life, because that to me is like one of the keys to living life, because pretty much everything in life is uncomfortable, right? If we expect to change and grow. So how do you think that ability of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, or even the discomfort, plays into our experiences?
I think it's natural for us to want to be comfortable. I mean, that's, you know, everybody wants to be comfortable, and we tend to do things to make our life comfortable. And of course, that makes our experiences smaller. You know, we don't risk things, we don't try things. We shut down, we use all our exits and our ways of limiting our experience so that we won't have to feel things that are a little bit uncomfortable. And so that naturally just limits our experience. Of course, it stops us growing. And when we can expand and find this sense of, it's okay to be a bit uncomfortable. In fact, that's quite a good sign. It means that we're living kind of in the juicy zone. We're living on the edge. Then, when we can make friends with that and actually realize that that there's a safety in that, actually, because if we're trying to keep everything comfortable and so that we don't feel anything that we don't really want to feel, I mean, we can't actually do that. It's not possible. So it means that we keep our life very small, and we can't do it anyway. So it's anyway going to go wrong. And there's this image of like, that rather than dodging all the things that are coming along, we just learn to catch them and be with them and bring them in, so that we can just walk through life and meet whatever arises. And then when we can meet whatever arises, the whole world opens up. We can be with anything. We can meet people, we can engage, we can dance and play and fall over and make mistakes and be with all of it. And that, so it opens the world wide up when we're willing to experience discomfort.
I totally agree. And I felt like, you know, I spent a lot of my life resisting the discomfort. So not only did I not want the discomfort of change, I resisted the resistance of it, which adds another layer of discomfort, right? Like I'm already applying discomfort for myself, and then I'm adding more. And that willingness to be open and to, you know, because I used to feel like I always explain it this way, like I was doing change wrong if I was uncomfortable. Like for some reason, I had a belief that when you changed, things were discomfortable because everybody always made it look so easy, right? You don't see the in-between space for most people. You see the beginning where they declare, I'm going to make a change. And then you see the end where they're completely happy in their new life, right? We don't see that ugly middle part, right? Where people go through that discomfort and that. So that was my belief that change was comfortable. And I really had to allow myself, and you talk about this in the book, about taking small incremental steps of that, right? Like I'm not going to go out the first day and do the biggest thing in the world that I'm scared of, right? I'm doing these in incremental steps that feel comfortable and safe to me. And comfortable isn't the word, that feel safe and doable to me, to show myself that it's okay to do these things, right? It's okay.
Yeah, I think The crucial bit is to be willing to be uncomfortable enough that you can still be there and feel it.